What a beautiful story we heard in the first reading with David and Goliath, and how David just had so much courage going against the Philistine. And it made me think about our own lives and our own world, how in our lives, in our world, we have different Goliaths. Maybe it's a personal issue we're struggling with. Maybe it's on a greater scale of things, looking out into society and seeing just the Goliath that we face as Christians, living our faith in a world that has completely turned against God, that is completely materialistic, that doesn't seem to care. Certainly that is an obstacle, a Goliath in some way. But I just want you to think about whatever that Goliath is for you. How do we confront that? How do we have the courage like David did? Well, if we look at him, we see that his trust was not in himself, that he shows just a boldness, but that boldness does not depend on his own strength, but rather the strength of God. That is why David could be so courageous and so bold in the face of such a threat. In our own lives too, we have to think about, how do I harness the power of God when I go against my Goliath? How do I lean on God? How do I ask God for help? If we've been walking in the Christian way a while, we know that we can't do anything good by ourselves. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. When we think we've done something good without God, it's probably in the next minute or two after that, we'll probably be priding ourselves at how good a job we did, therefore making that work basically worthless. But anything that we truly do well, with a purity of heart, purity of conscience, it's only with God's help. And we know that in our lives, in our Christian lives, it's not easy. It's not easy to live faithfully our calling as Christians, to live in holiness. And we have to learn to harness the power of God. A lot of I think it was the church fathers who talked about how the stones that David, or the stone that David shot at Goliath, was a symbol of like the rosary beads, right? Each of those rosary beads is like a stone that we can sling at the Goliath, the devil, whatever you want to call it. And we need to learn how, like David, to, like I said, harness the power of God, to lean into that, to not be afraid, but to stand and fight, to be warriors of God. I just want to share just a few thoughts as well about the gospel. I think that's very powerful, how Jesus, he enters into the synagogue, and there's this man with a withered hand, and this phrase really stuck out to me. It says, they watched Jesus closely. Speaking of the Pharisees, they watched Jesus closely. Some of us are more, we observe better than others, and just like any normal human being, we observe what people do. But think about how these Pharisees watched Jesus. What was their intention? Well, it wasn't good. They wanted to condemn him. They wanted to find fault with him. And there's Jesus, who is God, who does nothing but love and give and serve, and yet they watched him to find fault, to criticize, condemn him. And I want us to reflect on this, because often we too have different ways of watching people. We can look at others with eyes of love, or with eyes of condemnation, eyes of judgment. But we too watch others. But what is in our heart? That's really the question. What is in our heart. And what does Jesus do? In the face of that persecution and judgment, what does he do? Does he say, hey, I'm going to heal you, but let me take you into this side room where no one's going to see us and no one's going to judge me? No. He calls the man, he says, come up here before us. He wanted everyone to see. He's not afraid of judgment because he knows he's living in the truth. So brothers and sisters, as we reflect on these readings, we ask that we have the courage that David and Jesus had. David to fight against Goliath and to not step down, and Jesus to do always the right thing in spite of judgment, in spite of people's opinions or observations, to always live in the truth. Amen.